What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video, and today it's the Game Week 2 preview. So, going to go through all your topics and questions that you've put to me on Twitter, and there's a lot, as expected, going into Game Week 2. A lot of people panicking about Game Week 1, looking to make early transfers, using wildcards, stuff like that. So, it's all included in this video, as well as captaincy. If you haven't already hit that subscribe button, please make sure you do. Plenty of season-long content to come. Hit that like button if you enjoy it, and let's quickly talk about Fan Team. So, just because the season started, it doesn't mean you can't compete in Fan Team's €1 million guaranteed prize pool for this season. There's still late registration available, so right up until the Game Week 2 deadline, which is on screen, Saturday 19th, 12 o'clock CET, you can create a team and you get 70% of the Game Week 1 average points, which is 46 points. So you're going to be behind people like me. I think I started on 68 points, but you've got a little bit to start with, so you're not fully behind, and you can create a brand new team from scratch. So if you want to sign up for that, there is a handy link in the description below. Make sure you use that one. That is my sign up link. It is 18 plus. Check out begambleaware.org, and good luck with making the team. Okay, so much to get through in this video. It might be a slightly longer one than normal, but we'll see what we can get through and how quickly. So wildcards, first of all. A lot of people thinking of doing it. I've had lots of questions. Should I wildcard? At what point should I wildcard? How many hits should I take before I think about using what is a pretty precious chip? So I've had a look at my team, for example, and I've had a few kind of yellow flags. Werner and Pulisic are both yellow flagged. Now, I'm not saying both of them will miss out. I think Werner will probably be okay. And there was a little part last night where St. Maximin had gone off injured, then he came back on, and I was worried about whether he would be out. And at that point, if those three players were out, as an example, and there were some other moves I wanted to make, I might even consider using a wildcard in Game Week 2, because I'm having to use 3 transfers, which is a -8. And ultimately, there's other things that I might want to do as well, especially in like defence. I want to move some defenders around. Vinagre's not playing either. So there are things I would do. So at that point, I might consider a wildcard. There's not really a blanket answer. I can't just say, at this stage, you definitely use your wildcard. At this stage, you don't. I'd be more than happy to take a -4 in the first game week. Potentially a -8. But if it's a -8 plus there's other stuff you want to do, then I'd maybe consider using the wildcard. It is going to be important later on in the season, especially when we get towards winter break and stuff like that. Yes, you can't use it during the winter break, but you can use it before to potentially set up for that. We also know the transfer window is not closed yet, right? So that doesn't close to October 5th. Maybe there'll be some big signings that come in. It looks like Spurs are going to sign a new left back. There's all this talk about Bale, and I appreciate that Gareth Bale is always talked about, especially with Spurs. But it does seem like it's a bit of a more legit rumour than usual. There's going to be a lot to work out for such a big signing, of course. But let's see what happens. So for me, I would try and avoid using my wildcard where I can, but that doesn't mean you can't use it in Game Week 1 if there's enough changes that you need to make, not want to make, because remember, which we're going to come on to in a minute, Game Week 1, you built that team for a reason, and a lot of the players that I think are being considered to be transferred out, or even have been transferred out en masse, it's just ridiculous in some cases. Like Trent Alexander-Arnold and Aubameyang have been massively transferred out this week. That is absolutely insane. So I wouldn't be trying to use your wild card unless you absolutely need it this early on. Like think of it like this: you're making these rash decisions based on one game week. Next week it could be a whole load of different decisions you're making based off one game. We haven't even seen Man United and Man City play yet, so who knows what's going to go on there. So I would try not to use it. In terms of early transfers, I've had a lot of questions as well about whether you should make transfers early in the week. Like by now, it's Wednesday. Some people have already made transfers on Monday night, Tuesday night, trying to beat price rises. And this is a kind of thing you're going to have to do throughout the season. At some point, you're going to lose 0.1. Either a player in your team is going to go down, or a player you want to bring in is going to go up. It's not impossible, of course. You can keep making early transfers, but at some point you're not going to want to do that. There's going to be European football, cup matches as well that you're going to want to watch play first. There's some cup matches this week as well, I believe. So making early transfers is a bit risky if your players are playing in those competitions. The idea that someone could get injured in training, it has happened. We have got through to like Friday, Saturday, and then seen news that, oh, well, this player's out. And I think it happened with Zaha recently, like as in last season or the season before. Vardy, it definitely happened to as well. We suddenly saw news that he was out. And you tend to find that news later on in the week. So most of the time, if you can, I would get to Friday or Saturday before making your transfer. But if you've got, especially a planned transfer, so one of the ones that's been put to me, for example, is Ings to Martial. Some people had that planned before Ings even blanked in Game Week 1. So in pre-season, they knew they were going to do that. In that situation, if you're worried about Martial going up and you've only got 0.5 million to cover it, I would potentially make that move early. There's lots of talk about players coming back from Man United or coming to training late. Martial doesn't seem to be one of them. He has played for France as well, so I don't think it's going to be a huge issue. So that kind of transfer I would probably make. If he gets injured in training, then you can consider yourself super unlucky. The chances of that happening are pretty slim. But again, if you had like 1 million in the bank, maybe it's worth the risk that he does or doesn't go up in price. And even if he does, you've got yourself covered. But for 0.5, you maybe don't need to. Son, for example, like transferring Son out this early, I appreciate Spurs didn't do that well versus Everton on paper. And at times they didn't look great. But, you know, in terms of expected goals and stuff, the game was very close. Son did create some chances as well. He's playing Southampton next, which is a bit different. So would I be looking to take him out early to, you know, to avoid a price drop or something like that? Not really. If there's a player you really want to bring in, you're absolutely sure they are the one, then fair enough. But just to avoid a price drop, I personally wouldn't be doing that. So yeah, it depends on the transfer and depends how like absolutely sure you want to go for that move. Deviating from the plan. So someone asked me, at what point do you deviate from the game week 1 plan? We had our preseason team. We had a feeling about what would happen. Some stuff has, some stuff hasn't. So looking at some of the things from game week 1, like not going to go through every single team, but Everton were good versus Spurs, right? So if you weren't considering Everton players before, maybe now you are. Maybe James Rodriguez, Richarlison, or Calvert-Lewin are now in your thinking. I think that's okay to deviate from a plan. Spurs weren't great, so some people went for Spurs players, Son, Davis, Doherty. They weren't great, but they weren't awful. Plus, you have to remind yourself, they played a very good Everton side as well, or a side that looks like they're going to be good this season. So I wouldn't suddenly worry about them. Chelsea is an interesting one because Pulisic is out. We're going to talk about him later. Havertz wasn't great. I feel like they're missing Pulisic and Ziyech a little bit as well. So maybe we kind of got that wrong. So maybe we need to deviate a little bit from Chelsea players. The Wolves defence is good, but we already knew that. And the Liverpool defence is still good despite conceding 3 goals. Their expected goals for Leeds was something like 0.32. So on another day, they don't even score a goal with those chances. So, yeah, I don't think you need to deviate. I don't think we've seen enough to massively deviate from the plans, but there are a few players that stuck out. And this kind of goes on to the next question, what to look out for. So people said, like, what stats do you use? What do you make of post-lockdown? What do you look out for in the opening game weeks and stuff like that? So what I would say so far, using post-lockdown only doesn't look too great, right? Things have changed. Everton now have something to play for. They also have a brand new midfield. Suddenly, like I said, Richarlison, Calvert-Lewin, James Rodriguez, they all look like potentially good buys. So saying that Calvert-Lewin never scored post-lockdown, so don't get him, now looks rubbish. He's just scored against Spurs. Now he has good fixtures. Palace looked a bit like whipping boys at times post-lockdown. Their expected goals conceded against Southampton was 0.9. So Southampton can probably consider themselves a little bit unlucky not to have scored in that game at least once. But that was one of the best defences for the opening game week, right? Now, this is just one game week. You can't start looking at stats and just having a completely different opinion. But I wasn't mostly looking at post-lockdown anyway. I was looking at season-long stats from last year. So West Ham defence would target. Newcastle defence I would target. Maybe Crystal Palace. They were kind of middling. Aston Villa, for example, they were very poor all of last season. But post-lockdown, they were decent. Did they suddenly make so many changes that they're now a great defensive side? We're going to have to wait and see. That's things we just don't know yet. So I wouldn't put too much emphasis on kind of post-lockdown. Like Adams versus Ings, again, both of them were a little bit unlucky not to get a goal, so I wouldn't write them off just yet. In terms of what stats do I use, if you're going to use one, I do like the expected stats. So expected goals, expected assists, expected goals conceded. And I did a video on Fantasy Football Scout with Simon, sorry. And one of the reasons he said why these stats are good is there are other stats you can use, but expected goals kind of combines everything in one. It combines shots in the box, because it's basically saying how good was that chance, and shots in the box are better than long range shots. So I like expected stats, but one game is not enough to start thinking about, you know, overall bigger pictures. But you can use it for certain things. So saying the Liverpool defence, like I've just said, is bad because they conceded 3 goals against Leeds. Well, I would look at it and say they only conceded expected goals of 0.32. That's pretty low. I don't actually expect that to go up versus other teams, not down. And so it's probably still okay. So expected stats, if you're going to use just one kind of thing. So yeah, XG, and XGC, which is expected goals conceded. And then you've just got to look at kind of differences in teams from last year. So again, Everton, James Rodriguez is in there now. Spurs, I don't think Son was really hugging the touchline like people said post-lockdown. Didn't get any points, of course, but he's got good fixtures to come. And Chelsea, like I said, maybe they are missing Pulisic and Ziyech a little bit in that team. Havertz playing right just didn't really help. I'd want him to come more central. And ultimately, you know, that Chelsea team was new and I was quite excited about it. But missing some of their key players and putting Loftus-Cheek in the game as well, he just didn't play very well. So if they continue that, I'd probably be put off a little bit by Chelsea. But again, it's probably too early to completely write them off. So you can't just draw massive conclusions based on one game week, which is why we shouldn't be making massive rash decisions with our transfers in some cases. If someone wanted to get rid of Havertz, for example, fair enough. He didn't look that great. We don't know when he's going to come more central. He's got Liverpool next. Maybe you could make a move. But for other players like Werner, for example, just because he didn't score doesn't make him a bad player. I thought he was one of the kind of bright sparks on the pitch. Let's talk about penalties, because there was a lot of penalties in the opening game week, especially for two players, Salah and Vardy. And there's a lot of discussion about whether it's luck or whatever, or whether it's a good thing just to buy penalty takers. And I don't think my opinion has really changed on this much. I've talked a lot about Bruno Fernandez and whether he's worth 10.5 million. So here's what I think about penalties, right? Yes, I will buy players because they have penalties, but not just because of that. So I talked about this a lot. Salah versus Manny. For me, there was just no reason to go Manny when Salah had penalties. All his stats were better. So he's a great player that's going to score plenty of goals and get plenty of assists as well. But he also has penalties in his locker. Same for Jamie Vardy. He's going to score a lot of goals from open play. Plus he has penalties. The thing with Bruno Fernandez, and I keep going on about this because I don't want to get it confused that I think he's a bad player. But if you look at his expected goals and expected assists from non-penalty, right? Because penalties obviously do boost it up. They're not really that much better from Rashford, even for last season. And again, it's a small sample size for Fernandez. It's like 10 or 13 games in the league. But his underlying numbers were not better than Rashford, right? And we're taking penalties out of the equation. So suddenly for $1 million less, Rashford looks like potentially a better option. But, of course, if Man United go and get 10 plus penalties again, Bruno Fernandes will be brilliant. So, yes, it's maybe a bit lucky to get 2 penalties in one game. I would consider myself a bit lucky to have gotten a hat-trick from Salah in game week 1. But it's not luck to buy players that have penalties. The thing is, you just don't know when to expect them, right? Salah got 2 penalties. That's 40% of all the penalties Liverpool got last year already in game week 1. They might not get another one for 20 games. It's not something you can rely on, but buying players with penalties is not a bad shout. So if you wanted Bruno Fernandes, fair enough. But if Man United don't get as many penalties as last year, then potentially someone like Rashford could be a better option. It's all could. We don't know. We haven't seen Man United play yet this season. We haven't seen Bruno Fernandes kind of fresh off this break. And playing regularly throughout a whole season. We only have numbers from like game week 27 or 28 last year. So it's still not enough to draw a massive conclusion. He's obviously a great player for Man United and I love him. But let's see how many penalties we get. But ultimately, if you buy players with penalties, you can't then say, you know, it's bad luck or lucky when they do get them, because we know penalties are going to be given. We're not going to go through this whole season without penalties, and there could be even more this year as well. So this section is a bit more about specific players that I was asked about. I was actually surprised at how many times I got asked about Pulisic. I assumed his ownership was really low, but it's actually nearly 10%, which isn't massively high, but it is higher than I maybe would have expected. Because like I said, I'm trying not to look at ownership when I decide or don't decide to buy a player. So obviously Pulisic is a bit of a worry because he didn't play at all in the first game, wasn't even in the squad. So I thought he was available. I read back the quotes. It said in contention. To me, that still says in the squad, maybe going to get a start. If not, you'd hope for minutes off the bench. But maybe I got it wrong. A lot of people have tweeted me to say the kind of injury he had, he was never going to be rushed back, etc. So I must admit, as an owner, I'm now a little bit worried about him, because if he wasn't even in the squad for the last one, the best we can hope for Liverpool is probably to be in the squad and get minutes. And if he's not in the squad again, if he's ruled out, then maybe it's kind of squad and a few minutes against West Brom as well. And then suddenly you're holding a player for 3 game weeks and maybe getting 20 minutes. And again, you don't even know if he's going to play in that West Brom game either. So a lot of this is going to come down to what Frank Lampard says. And in contention, like it came out after the game that he was still injured. So in contention, to me, means something different. So we're going to have to watch what Frank Lampard says and how he says it and what wording he uses. But if he is out of the Liverpool game, or there's any doubt that he's out of the Liverpool game, I'm going to get rid, I think, because, again, like I said just a minute ago, there's no guarantee he then plays a huge amount of minutes in that West Brom game. And like I said, Chelsea, until they have all these players fit, Pulisic, Ziyech and whoever else it might be, maybe they're not going to be the team that we kind of wanted them to be pre-season, or at least I wanted them to be pre-season. Not to say I'll never come back to Pulisic. I might even come back to him in a few weeks, but I'd maybe looking at getting rid. Now, I've looked at Son. if you've got 0.5 in the bank. I know it's a bit of a risk because Spurs weren't great in that first game, but they have got Southampton, West Ham and Newcastle in the next 4. So especially if you're a Son owner, by the way, just keep him, I think. But the other option is to go down to 7.5 million to James Rodriguez. And I am strongly considering that. His numbers over the last 4 seasons have been decent. And they were very similar in that Spurs game. And it's not like Spurs is an easy fixture either. Now, obviously, at Bayern Munich or Real Madrid, you're trying to get assists from much better quality players than probably Richarlison or Calvert-Lewin. But I think he's going to create so many chances that he looks like a great option. 5 chances created from open play in the last game against Spurs. He also has some set pieces as well. I'd prefer him, I think. They've got really good fixtures as well. For up until about game week 10, they're pretty good. And I'd actually prefer James Rodriguez to Greenwood. I know a lot of people are going to hate me saying that, but if I swap Pulisic out, it's probably going to be to James Rodriguez, maybe with an eye to get Pulisic back at some point, so maybe I'll keep 1 million in the bank. But ultimately, if I don't want to do that, I've got 1 million to spend elsewhere as well. Maybe pump it into the defence or wherever it may be, right? Right now, I'm not too sure. But James Rodriguez is what I'm looking at. If he is past fit for the Liverpool game, then I may still keep him, because if he gets minutes on that game and then he's back for West Brom, because I do think they really missed him, by the way, for that opening game against Brighton. Yes, they won 3-1, but it wasn't a convincing performance. So I think he'll be back sooner rather than later, but if he's not available for Liverpool, he's gone from my team. Vinagre, he doesn't look like he's going to get into the team now. I actually read a tweet from a journalist for The Athletic, Tim Spears, before the deadline that said he thought Marçal was going to line up at left wing back, and I still put Vinagre in my team in the hope that he would start because he's such good value. For me, if you've got a bunch of other defenders you can play, I don't think there's a risk or there's any reason why you shouldn't necessarily keep him. Like for me, I can play Saiss, Shaw and Trent Alexander-Arnold most weeks and just bench Vinagre, and when I have a spare transfer on a 4.5 million defender, I might use it. I'm not going to worry about whether he goes down in price. At some point he probably will, because he's so highly owned. He's going to be sold now he's not played, and he could drop 0.1 million at some point. That will be frustrating, but right now, if you've got other defenders to play, a 4.5 million defender transfer is probably not a priority. If you do want to transfer him out, if you've got 0.5 in the bank, I would just go to Saiss. I know he plays Man City this week, so hopefully you could try and save the transfer for Game Week 3 instead. But I think targeting Wolves defence is, with their fixtures, is just a great idea. They're so good. At 4.5, you got Charlie Taylor at Burnley. Very boring, but he gets clean sheets. Eiling at Leeds as well. I think they're going to keep plenty of clean sheets. And Lamptey at Brighton looked amazing against Chelsea. So if he fits in with your defender rotation, he's definitely another one that I would look at. So I touched on this already, but selling Salah and Aubameyang, I do not get it, right? Aubameyang, probably one of the best captains this week against West Ham. Why is he being sold? Like, people are rushing to get players like Kevin De Bruyne. We've not even seen them play yet. And they're playing Wolves away, one of the toughest defences in the league. I don't really get it. Salah, a lot of people still going through with Salah to Bruno Fernandez. If you've got Aubameyang as well, I really don't get that move, because yes, Bruno Fernandez could be a captain this week, but surely Aubameyang is just as good, if not maybe slightly better. If we think that Crystal Palace are actually going to do okay defensively based on that first game, maybe Man United players who, again, haven't played yet are not the ones to be targeting. So I don't get this, right? Salah looked electric. Yes, he was a bit lucky to get 2 penalties in one game, but overall he looked great. Chelsea away, not the greatest fixture, I get that. Then it's Arsenal at home. Then I think it's Villa away, Everton away, Sheffield United at home, West Ham at home. These are good fixtures you're going to want him for eventually. So yeah, you could sell him, but you're probably going to want to buy him back. That's 2 transfers to get rid of one of the best players in the game, who can score against anyone, by the way. Now, I'm not saying we should target him for captaincy against Chelsea, but could he get something up against Alonso potentially? It could be Azpilicueta, I get it. But yeah, I just don't get it, right? I just don't get it. Everyone's basing this off one game week. Aubameyang only scored 1 goal. Everyone wants Bruno Fernandez. Fair enough if that was your plan already. If it wasn't, this is a massive knee-jerk, I think. In terms of Wolves players, they did look good. It was Sheffield United. I did kind of talk about them pre-season. I expected them to concede more goals this year. Not great conceding 2 so quickly. It was like in like 6 minutes or something like that. So that obviously affected them for the rest of the game. Then they weren't able to get back into it. It's very hard to penetrate Wolves' defence as well. In terms of players that stood out, Jimenez looks like he could just be as consistent as he's been the last 2 seasons. I don't think anyone really doubted that. I didn't necessarily think you needed him for Sheffield United and Man City, but maybe he's going to make a mockery of that. And 8.5 million, yes, it's more annoying than having to pay whatever he was last year, 7 or 7.5. But he looks like he's going to be so consistent again. And Wolves do have good fixtures. He looks good. Very interesting that Jota didn't start, Podence and Neto did. Obviously, Traore played right wing back. If they sign a new right wing back, Traore will be pushed forward, and it does muddy the water a bit. And I can't imagine Jota is sitting on the bench for the whole season. But Podence, I think that's how you pronounce it. If he plays, I really, really like him for 5.5 million. If he gets regular minutes, he'll probably be the best 5.5 million option by quite a long way, I would imagine. So keep an eye on him. And like I said, Sice, if they sign a new... Marcel is okay, I think. But is he going to play every single game? Maybe he is if Fernandez out of favour. I don't know how attacking he really is though. I looked at his stats for the last few seasons. Not really too many assists. Maybe in that Wolves team it would be a bit better. But I think Sice for the goal threat is much better option than Cody. And if they sign a new right wing back, I'd definitely be looking at them as well. And before we talk about captaincy, I just want to talk about some of the basics. I'm probably going to miss some of these. So if you've got any kind of FPL Basics questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll try and get back to them. But I always get asked these every season. I think sometimes, like I and other content creators forget there's new players playing the game, and they do have these basic questions, which a lot of us, know like the back of our hand, right? Price rises. 0.1 million maximum a day. You can check out sites like fplstatistics.co.uk who will try and tell you when they're going to happen. They're much more inaccurate at this stage of the season, but you can still check them out for an idea. They can maximum rise 0.1 million a day. They rise overnight, usually between 1 and 4 a.m. In UK time. And they can rise a maximum of 0.3 million in a game week, right? Not necessarily a week, because sometimes game weeks are only 3 days apart, but in a game week. And that's the same for falling. So maximum 0.1 fall a day, and maximum 0.3 in a game week. In terms of player, how the value works, if you buy a player's got to rise 0.2 million to get 0.1 million selling value, right? So to put that into perspective, if a player costs 8 million, let's say Richarlison, and he rises to 8.2 million while he's in your team, then you'll be able to sell him for 8.1 million, right? Just to give people a chance to not get completely priced out of buying all these players. If you use a transfer, if you make multiple transfers and take hits like a -8 or a -12, your wild card will cancel that. So if you decide you want a wild card, that will cancel the hits you've taken. It will reset your team and you'll be able to make as many transfers as you want. The free hit team is basically the same. That will cancel out transfers, but obviously you only get to use that once, and then your team reverts back to whatever it was the previous game week. So I think that's most of the really basic questions I've been answered. There are probably more out there that I've forgotten, so make sure to leave me a comment below and I'll try and get back to as many as possible. So perhaps, surprise, surprise, I think that Aubameyang is probably the standout captain option this week. There are other ones to consider, which we'll talk about in a minute. But for me, Aubameyang's already off the mark. He's a great player. We know how many goals he scored last year, right? And also, he scored a lot of his goals against non-top 6 sides. And until we see more, until we get a bigger sample size this season, West Ham is a defence that I would target for points this year. They weren't great last year. They haven't really made enough signings this year that I would expect that to change. They give away plenty of chances. Newcastle have already scored a couple of times against them this season. So Aubameyang is going to cause Fredericks problems on that left-hand side. So Aubameyang, I think, looks great. Chelsea versus Liverpool is an interesting one because a lot of people think that will be open, and it could be. Could be spacing behind for Werner, spacing behind for Salah, especially if they play Alonso. I'm not sure they're going to. Maybe they'll go to a back 5 Chelsea, I don't know. But it could also be tight because they're both very good defences. Chelsea's main problem is Kepa, and we saw that again against Brighton. He should have saved that goal that ended up going in. So I think it was from Trossard. So they're both quite good defences, but they can be good in attack as well. So it could be an open game, but it's not a side... or they're neither side that I would really target. I don't really want to risk Werner captain versus Liverpool. Don't really want to risk Salah or Manny against Chelsea. So I'd probably avoid that fixture. Man United for Palace is super interesting because a lot of people are big on this game. I think a lot of Man United's next 4 fixtures are quite good. But I think a lot of people are relying on points from this Crystal Palace game. Bearing in mind, Man United haven't played. Bearing in mind, a bunch of players have come back late to training. Again, not maybe players you're considering like Rashford or Martial, Fernandez. As far as I know, they've been training. They've played pre-season matches as well. Internationals too as well for like Martial and Bruno as well, I think. But players like Pogba are late back and stuff like that. And it's just, you just don't know how they're all going to come out and play in the first game week. Crystal Palace looked like a great game last year. But again, 0.9 XG conceded versus Southampton isn't that bad. You'd expect a bigger test against Man United, and I'm not, I'm fully expecting them to score. But it's first game back. You hardly ever know how it's going to go, as we've seen in game week 1. Think about all the things you've changed your mind on based on one game week. The same could happen here. So Bruno's on penalties. Like I said, from open play, I think Rashford potentially based on last year, could be a slightly better option. But All you need is for Palace to foul one of the Man United attackers a couple of times in this game. Bruno gets 2 penalties, and it's like Salah or Vardy. You look like a genius. So I wouldn't try and put people off captaining Man United players in this game. Absolutely not. But I like the fact that Arsenal have already played. I like the fact they're playing West Ham defence. And so I prefer Aubameyang. But I think second best is probably Man United attackers. Man City players versus Wolves, I just wouldn't go there. They've not played a game yet in the league so far this season. And Wolves is one of the best defences in the league. So it's not a team that I would target for captain returns from. Man City, obviously the best attacking side in the league, so they could get something there, but I'm not expecting a big score, not big enough to warrant captaining one of their players. You've got outside shots, Leicester versus Burnley, so Jamie Vardy, he had 0 shots, by the way, 0 shots in that first game, really backed up by penalties. Burnley, again, haven't played, so maybe that'd be an advantage to Leicester, but Burnley, very good defensive side. They have been for years under Dyche. Again, not really a fixture I would necessarily target. But again, all it needs is a penalty or two. And suddenly Jamie Vardy's looking like a genius again. And Everton versus West Brom, if we think they're going to be as good as they were against Spurs, against a team that should be weaker defensively, who knows? Richarlison, James Rodriguez, Calvert-Lewin could be outside punts. But if we're talking realistic, it really is Aubameyang for me as the standout this week. Second would be Man United players. But I do think there's slight risks involved, but perhaps for the upside, they're risks worth taking. That's it for this one. Don't forget, if you haven't already, use that sign-up link in the description below if you want to check out Fan Team. Like I said, you'll have a bit of a start with some points, and you'll be able to create a brand new team from scratch as well. So if you've not already checked that out, link in the description below. It is 18+. BeGambleAware.org is the website you can check out. All the links are in the description below. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. Much appreciated as always. Your support this season so far has been incredible. And of course, if you've not already subscribed, make sure to hit that button. It is completely free to do, so please do consider doing that. Leave me any questions below, leave me any comments below on what I've said, and I'll catch you tomorrow for a live stream at 8 PM. Hit that notification bell when you subscribe, and you'll know exactly when that has gone up. See you later all.